Hi, my name's Safdar Ahmed. I'm an artist who focuses mostly these days on drawing and comics. I also do community art workshops with asylum seekers and refugees in a voluntary capacity, and I play a bit of heavy metal music on the side. Growing up, I particularly loved horror and fantasy movies, novels, and comics. I think because that sort of provided an escape. It helped me get through a very serious teenage depression. But also, I don't think I realized it quite at the time, but horror has a way of prying at the things society tries to keep hidden and keep buried. And so it sort of cracked open my imagination in a way and allowed me to look critically at the world around me. And so from then till now, I think horror's been a big part of my cultural life and way of understanding the world. And so these days I try and use horror in a critical way to look at issues of race and class and discrimination and that sort of thing. Underground comics are a very unique way to tell stories. I think there's a very strong autobiographical tradition in underground comics, which is very raw, very self-revealing, but also very self-critical and self-deprecating even. And so for me, it's the perfect form to tell my own stories and to try and get across, unique points of view. Also through Refugee Art Project, I've been really inspired to see the stories that many of the asylum seekers and refugees that we've worked with have produced. It's really galvanizing and energizing to see people's agency and autonomy respected and empowered through art. So I'm a big believer in the power of art to change individual lives and to change society. So that's why I think storytelling is crucial. All of our experiences end up in some type of narrative. It's how we make sense of the world, to fold those experiences into a narrative context. So for me, hearing unique stories is crucial. So my Villawood comic basically emerged from my work with Refugee Art Project, which is a non-profit community art organisation that I started with some friends. We basically went into the Villawood Detention Centre about 10 years ago and offered art workshops for anyone who was interested, and that really built up a lovely creative community. We've also done workshops for refugees in Western Sydney for about 8 or 9 years, first in Parramatta and then in the studio we're currently in Ashfield, in Thurning Villa. And so essentially that's been about creating a safe space where people can come and make friends and form a sense of community, and from there I think feel safe enough and confident enough to express themselves on their own terms and do the things they want to do. And some of the work that's come from Refugee Art Project has really inspired me personally, and I've developed friendships over many years. The Villawood comic really came from that. It was the desire to sort of bring some of those stories out to the Australian public, which would otherwise just be forgotten or unknown because they happen inside a detention centre, which is a very repressed space, and there's a reason the government doesn't want people in Australian detention centres to have phones to get the truth out to the broader community. So Villawood was well received in 2015. It won a Walkley Award in the artwork category, which was great support, and from there I've expanded it into the graphic novel that I'm working on at the moment called Still Alive, which will be published next year through 12 Panel Press, and that's a big work coming to almost 200 pages. Still Alive is a very challenging graphic novel, partly because I feel like I'm representing narratives which are not my own. So there's a sense of responsibility, and I hope I'm doing justice to the stories that have been shared with me and in a collaborative spirit by people that I've gotten to know very well. And it's also a very heavy subject. I think Australia's treatment of asylum seekers and refugees is a huge stain, moral stain on this country's history. It's punitive, it's quite cruel and sadistic, and the closer you look at it, the worse it gets. So I hope the graphic novel can challenge and educate people. It's motivated by a strong sense of anger and indignation on my part that these things are even happening, and I hope I've translated that into a graphic novel that will inform and educate people. I'd say my background influences my work insofar as I'm very passionate to talk about some of the things that I've experienced, not saying everyone has to make personal work, but for me, I want to speak from the subject position of being an Australian Muslim, because I'm deeply affected by the racism and Islamophobia that's been, around forever, particularly in this society. So I want to explore those themes in my work. I also make autobiographical work about having a chronic illness, because I had Crohn's disease for the last 15 years or so. And I think there's a lot of interesting stories and ways of looking at those issues which haven't been explored before. So I'm excited to kind of tell stories that don't make it into the commercial mainstream. Hazeen maybe extends some of the interest that I have in horror and using horror as a sort of critical lens. We're a two-piece band. Started with a good friend of mine, Jan Yelchinkaya, who's also a comic maker, a zine maker and an academic. He plays drums and I play guitar and sing vocals. Basically we dress up in corpse paint and act out the monster, the Muslim monster or the source of terror, and satirize a lot of the racism that's around in Australian society, a lot of the anti-Muslim prejudice that exists, and sort of throw it back in the audience's face. Death metal and extreme metal aestheticizes the darkness and turns it into something which is fun and exhilarating and transporting. And so that's what we try and do with Hazeen. Often in our gigs, we will end with a cake eating ceremony where we create an object of fear and invite the audience to participate in a sort of communal, ritualized brain eating ceremony. And that's a nice way of bringing everyone together in an act of solidarity, explicitly in an anti-racist spirit. You can find many of my comics at my website, which is safdarahmed.com. I've got a lot of webcomics which you can find from there. Also, you can follow me on Instagram, handle Safdarnama, N-A-M-A, and look forward to my graphic novel, Still Alive, which will be coming out early next year through 12 Panel Press.